You know, it really baffles me the amount of Christians who will turn around and say it's better not to read the Bible than to read a poor translation. I seriously don't know where Christians are coming from when they say that, because surely having some form of scripture available to people is better than none. Now, we have it good today. We have a lot of good translations that are really easily accessible to us. But if you go back to the church in its earliest days didn't have the canon of scripture that we have today. In fact, it only had the Old Testament, and if they were lucky, they had a letter from Paul or from Peter or from James, someone like that. They might have had a gospel account, but they wouldn't have had the four gospels that we have to look at to compare and contrast. And they certainly wouldn't have had the plethora of commentary material and study material that we have. So we are in a really privileged position today to say that scripture is more accessible than ever before. However, people then take that as a snobbery route to say that their understanding of scripture is better than others. And what you're actually doing when you say that is that you're limiting God's power into that God can only work through one reading of scripture, yours. That's not how God works. God doesn't need any scripture to work into people's life. And time again, He has shown that that has been the case. There have been people who have come to Christ simply because other people have been a Christian to them, or that God has pulled them in some other way, shape, or form, even without other Christians. So, sitting there saying that your version of scripture is the only one that counts and the only one that can be read is not Christian values, because it is excluding people who don't have access or don't have access, whether that's physically or in learning capacity, whatever it might be. But also, you're sitting there trying to limit God when you do that. So, have another think about why you're saying that your version of Scripture is the only version of Scripture, if you are indeed saying that, and think again, because that's not how God works, and there is no superiority or elitism in the Church of Christ.